All right. So we are going live for the first time. And yep, everything looks like it should be okay here. Let's see. What do I got here? What do I have this NASCAR? Why is this up here? This is weird. I have a NASCAR. Oh, hopefully that's not. Oh, you know what? I forgot to. I'm sure people are out there watching us live now, but that's okay. I have to make sure everything is going to go okay here for the. Oh, there we are. Okay. That's right. I forgot there's a delay. I was looking at my show I was telling you about 2 days ago. I was
Yeah.
looking at the
Okay.
thumbnail I put together for that show. And I'm like,
Uh,
why is that thumbnail up? But I forgot there's a delay. Anyway, hello, everybody. We are live for the first time for our final mock draft show on the Our Lads Football Network for the OFN today with Dave Syvertsen, the senior scout at ourlads.com. And Dave, you have some updated posts, correct? At Our
yes, sir.
Lads?
I have. Yeah, at our lads, we just posted my first and final first round mock draft with analysis, and it's sure to be wrong. There's no question about that. So
No.
because of that, I got a little creative with some trades, and
Yeah, you
I'd like
did. I
to
noticed that.
I'd like to explain myself, both what the player is and why I think that fit works. So instead of just listing off a bunch of names with a sentence or two, I tried to give at least some rationale behind the picks, because I think a lot of times when the disagreements come, and they're always warranted, because none of these things are ever right. But I like to kind of just put some of my thought process out there and just kind of let you dive in a little bit, and hopefully that can answer some of the questions.
All right. Well, let's take a look first of all, because what we're going to do is on this mock draft, we are going to pretty much keep to the same pattern. We're going to go back and forth. I'll get the first pick, you'll have the second pick, and so on. And there was and by the way, on the bottom of this scroll, you can see the ticker that we have our individual mock drafts. So mine, I do not have any trades. Dave has them, as he just mentioned, with trades. By the way, have you ever done a mock draft with trades before?
Not with this much detail, but I've never done one through our lads on this, just kind of some stuff on my own to kind of project some things. But no, this is the first time I've done something like this.
Okay. And how long did it take you to do it?
A few
A
days, to be
few
honest with you.
days.
Yeah, you second guess yourself. Once sometimes you get to pick number 24 and you want to start all over.
Yeah, right. I don't like the way that
Just
worked out. Yeah, that doesn't look right. But
well, it's funny.
but you know what? We say this every year. There's going to be players that are going to drop that just doesn't make any sense. It happens
Yep.
all the time.
That's exactly it. I mean, that's what I keep telling myself is if you have a predictable mock, then you're doing it all
Yeah.
wrong. So there's a few things that I'll, when I do these, I like to project what I think will happen or what could happen, not necessarily what I think should happen. And not everyone agrees with that, but I like, because you give that yourself that freedom, you kind of even don't know what to expect yourself. You try to go in there and try to find a few curveballs. Every year there's someone picked in the top 10 that you don't expect. Every year there's someone that falls out of the first round that you would never expect, and someone gets picked at the end of the first round that you'd never expect. So I tried to throw a couple of those things in there as well.
All right. So tell you what, let's get started because the first few shouldn't be very difficult.
Yep.
But well, with the exception of the fact that there's still a lot of debate, even believe it or not, we are 6 days away from the draft, and there's still people who are unsure about who the first pick is going to be between CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. Initially, we all thought, well, of course, we thought, Bryce Young is the best quarterback. He should be the first pick. Then there was this wave of CJ Stroud, and the Panthers really like Stroud. And all right, well, we could believe that. That's okay. They like Stroud, and that's the direction they're going to go. But then the last week or two, now it's just gone the other way. And now it's like, nah, you know what? It's going to be Bryce Young. That's the guy that they've kind of liked all along, and that's the way it's going to be. So we both put Bryce Young. We both had the same Bryce Young going first, and CJ Stroud going second. So,
Yeah.
are you? What did you hear yourself? Anything that was like that first indicator that led you to believe that? Yeah, you know what? I think this is really the way they're going to go.
No, just what's out there publicly with ESPN, with Shifter, and some of these other guys on NFL Network. That there's a separation between Young, Stroud, Levis, Richardson, Hooker. The only thing that brings them close together is the size. And in today's NFL, it does seem like size is not as much valued as it used to be. So because of that, and because I think Young is such a better quarterback than these other guys, when you take out the size, right, it's part of my personal equation. But if you take that out, as a leader, as a guy that you want to put the ball, what's the one thing that we said over and over throughout the entire process here? If your life depended on one guy to lead your score down the field, to lead your team down the field for a score, Young's the guy you want. And the one hesitation I have is the quarterbacks that Frank Reich has played with, right? They are all big physical dudes. I mean, Carson Wentz, Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan, Andrew Luck, average those guys out. They're 6'4", 231 pounds. So it's almost like he's a varsity football coach with these guys, and now he's going to the freshman team and trying to find his guy, and that's who Bryce Young is. So, David Tepper, owner of the Panthers, very risky business type guy. He wants, I think, some shock value. This is a team that did try to trade for Matthew Stafford, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson. He stayed on the sideline. He did not get involved. I think this move up to number 1 overall has him written all over it. He said, we're getting that number 1 pick no matter what it costs, even if we have to overpay, so that we can put some fans in the seats. And we want the story as much as we want the player. Bryce Young is the story.
All right. So then you have Stroud, which would again seem like it's an obvious pick because they're going to take the second quarterback. We felt that all along. You are hearing, well, will Houston, though, will they go after, will they trade down and add some picks and go after a defensive player here like Will Anderson? That kind of, now I just think that's, hey, we're open for business. You want to give us, you can give us a call, give us a trade offer. We'll consider it. But I don't know unless Houston wanted to trade down a spot or two, like to Indianapolis, and we've kind of talked about that. But I can't. So I think that's okay. I mean, if that's only if Houston is like, well, we'd prefer Bryce Young too, and we like CJ Stroud, but to tell you the truth, we don't really think CJ Stroud is that much better in our minds than either Richardson or Levis's future. And if Caserio believes that, then maybe he is willing to trade down a couple of spots so the Colts can move up and get Stroud if that's the guy they want. But, more than likely they're going to stay where they're at and pick Stroud.
Yeah, this is an interesting situation because there's a lot of smoke right now about the fact that, to dumb it down, Houston's not taking Stroud. And what do we always say this time of year? Don't believe everything you hear. The few guys that are kind of in front of this story right now are guys I completely trust. And one of them is Lance Zierlein from NFL.com, who also is in Houston, right? And who is also almost always right about the Houston Texans and who they're going to pick in the draft. So there's some credence to this. There's some credibility. If they can't find a trade partner, I believe, and this mock is without trades, what you and I are doing, I believe they will sit on CJ Stroud. But part of this talk right now, it could be they want to make Indianapolis nervous at number 4, right? Because if the story gets out there that Houston's not going to take Stroud, that might make someone else who's behind Indianapolis want to trade up and grab Stroud. And maybe that's who Indianapolis wants. I mean, that's something that it would be a very kind of advanced move to get the media on your side, to get Indianapolis to trade up to number 2, give a future asset to Houston, and Houston still ends up with who they want overall. So that's something to consider as a possibility as to why we're hearing Houston doesn't want Stroud. It would shock me to see Houston leave this draft without a new quarterback.
Yeah, they can't. Yeah. So even if they trade down a couple, it's got to be they pick their quarterback then.
Yeah.
And then they're going to use that other pick for something else.
Right. The agent for Stroud is the same agent as Deshaun Watson. And you know that relationship between Houston and that agent is not very strong right now because of what happened there. At some point, big boys are going to have to be big boys and get over that because you're going to deal with him no matter what. But it's another thing to think about in regard to Stroud and the Texans.
All right. So, but bottom line, look, we kind of know about where these quarterbacks are going to go. So, because if Indianapolis does move up, they're going to get Stroud. So Stroud still stays there at 2. And then Arizona, this doesn't really change much either, right? I mean, this still should be Will Anderson.
Yeah, I think Will Anderson, if you could make the argument that it's Jalen Carter, it's got to be one of those two. But considering what this team needs, more than a game wrecker inside, I think they need a pure pass rusher. I mean, they lost J.J. Watt, they lost Zach Allen, they lost Marcus Golden. That was 1, 2, 3 on a team that struggled to rush the passer last year. So Will Anderson, I think, gives you that guarantee that you have at least something on the edge, and then you build from there. And there are some other pieces on that line that can get some interior pressure. So Will Anderson, and also off the field, there are issues in Arizona now with some of the character concerns and some of the things that are going on in that organization. Anderson, you feel good about. Carter, he's an unknown. Yeah. You know, I mean, on the field, he's a known, but off the field, some of the character stuff, that is a whisper about him that could cause some hesitation.
All right. Then the Colts come up and, all right, well, quarterback. So, that shouldn't change much. And you, on your mock, well, we both on our mocks, once again, are in agreement. We haven't changed at all so far for the first 4. And Will Levis over Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, this is a tough call for me.
It's not easy.
There's a lot there's a lot of signs that point to Richardson because of Shane Steichen coming from Philadelphia. You know, if Richardson has a Jalen Hurts type style of play. They're different players, different sizes, I know. But when you talk about what Jalen Hurts does on the field and what has made him so good, it's kind of what Richardson could be.
Oh, yeah, Richardson could be like 1,000-yard rusher.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Right away, too. So you know that it's kind of like in their head already that in recent success, like that's a big deal to me. You know, recency bias has a lot of impact over decision makers. What has happened lately? But I'm going to stick with what I think. I think Jim Irsay, the owner of the Colts, is going to be very involved in this decision. And he has a profile of quarterbacks that he likes, that he consistently goes after. And think about some of these quarterbacks since he took over: Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan. Which quarterback remaining fits the profile of those guys? Just a downfield pocket passer, big, powerful arm. It's Will Levis. And the offensive coordinator that the Colts hired, Jim Bob Cooter, he made a name for himself in Detroit with Matthew Stafford. He did end up getting fired at some point, but I think he started to turn things around with Stafford. And Levis, before the season, everyone that watched his tape from last year, the name that came up to mind was Stafford. Now, it did not work out in 2022, but I still think that the fact that he played under 2 different NFL offensive minds at Kentucky, his 2 years there, a little bit less of a learning curve, and you might feel better about at least his floor will be a little bit higher than Richardson. So it'd be a fascinating time to listen to these guys talk about who they want. History here with offensive coordinator, owner, general manager. What kind of quarterback have they worked with in the past? And it's Will Levis.
All right. So Seattle, they really, I mean, when the initial stages of the draft was set, like the first day or two, I don't think there was any way Seattle thought that they'd have a chance at Jalen Carter. And now they have an excellent chance at Jalen Carter. This, though, is where you believe it could be the first trade, and you've talked about this for the past week, and you have it on your mock draft with your trades. And of course, it would be a typical Eagles move to try and steal the best interior lineman of the draft, or maybe period, the best lineman of the draft, and because they've got that 10th pick, it's a good enough area where a team like Seattle would go, all right, so we have to move back 5 spots, but it's not terrible. Plus, we get the additional first-round draft pick. And I don't know whether or not they'd have to add anything at that, but that's still a good starting point. But the question then is, because let's see, on your mock, you had Seattle then going with Nolan Smith. So the question then is, they must, because in my opinion, I'd really want Nolan Smith to be, I mean, they better feel that he is going to be a really key contributor for them. And if they feel he's going to be a long time, really good contributor, I think it's a really good trade. But they better be right about that, because if Jalen Carter becomes like a superstar and they move down and Nolan Smith is just a player, then it's one of those trades that's going to come back to haunt them.
And just also, I mean, look at the Seattle Seahawks current depth chart, right? I mean, they are weakest at nose tackle right now. They signed Jarron Reed to a 2-year deal, comes back home to the team that drafted him after a little bit of a hiatus in Kansas City, I think it was, in Green Bay. I think they'll be fine with him. I think they're happy with him, but they know he's not the top flight guy that they thought they drafted in 2016 in the second round. And then you have Brian Moe next to him, run defender at best. This is a defense that got beat up on the ground last year. He was a part of that. And they have essentially nothing behind those guys. So take the top of the line out of it, Moan and Reed. There's no depth. So you have no other bodies there. So you know they're going to add someone. And if you know you're going to add someone to that interior group, why wouldn't you grab the best one of the bunch by a wide margin? There's nobody close to Jalen Carter in this class. And the fact that he's sitting there right now, unless you get a trade offer that you really like, it almost seems foolish and very anti-Pete Carroll to look past Jalen Carter here.
All right, so we are not going to have trades in our mock. This is your pick, and this is still an easy pick for Jalen Carter. So
I think 5 is you. You're the odd numbers, right? So,
oh, that's right. I was looking at the. I got it. Let me.
So you got Jalen, right?
My notes from before this. Yeah. Well, either way, we have Carter.
All right. Yeah. So we would have agreed there.
Yeah. So next up, Detroit, and let's see. The Lions are in a position here where this is probably. I think if the first 5 go the way that we have it, I think that could be a lot of mock drafts. Yeah, we could all see it going that way without any trades, of course.
Right.
Or even if there was a trade, the names in those spots could be exactly. But this is where it could get a little bit more interesting. Yeah. Does Detroit go with an edge rusher, or do they go with a corner?
Mm-hmm. So the focal point of this offseason for Detroit has been the secondary. They added a lot of bodies there. They traded away a former top 5 overall pick. And they know that with all of these blown leads that we've seen them be on the wrong side of in the Dan Campbell era, the best way to combat that is what they've already done is build the trenches. They're not done there, by the way. And then the other side is they got to get a number 1 corner. The defensive backs that they have on this team are really good accessory pieces, really good players that if you have a number 1 guy, they appear to be better than they are. They don't have that number 1 guy right now. And here they are sitting 6 overall, and they can literally pick whatever corner they want. Whether it's Witherspoon or Gonzalez, they get to pick their number 1 corner on their board. And that's a spot. I mean, we saw 2 of these guys go in the top 3 picks last year, right? Top 5 picks last year with Stingley and Gardner. And this almost seems late to get a number 1 corner, because I consider Christian Gonzalez on the same level as Derek Stingley. Not the same level as Sauce Gardner, an all-pro in his rookie year. Let's not put that expectation on him. But as a cover man, as a guy that wants to be that can be the number 1 man in the secondary, I'm going to go with Gonzalez to Detroit. And this really rounds out what they've done. They've really completely flipped this secondary to a group, a unit that when you look at the names on there, you're saying this could be one of the best in the league. And they have some disruptors up front. So if Detroit doesn't throw us a curveball, and I still think quarterback's an option because of the long-term future, because they have a lot of capital, I'm going to stick with Christian Gonzalez at corner.
Yeah, and I think that that's going to be either the way they go, or if they go edge rusher. I mean, in my mock draft, that's where I went. But again, it's going to be an either or situation, and I am very, I don't know, kind of amused about, because on my mock I have Tyree Wilson going as the edge rusher here.
Okay.
But I'm very amused about the recent stories about how Tyree Wilson has just flown up the draft, and he could end up being picked over Will Anderson. I mean, that's almost like, come on.
Bizarre.
I mean,
yeah, it's bizarre. And it's funny. I've watched a lot of Tyree. I've watched a lot of Will. And I don't think I've ever walked away from their tape saying it's even a discussion. I just don't see what you get out of Tyree Wilson that you don't out of Will Anderson, other than just sheer size. And is this an example of the more time you have between the last game and the draft, you start over-analyzing things and start making things up in your head, right? I think you got to go back and watch this tape, especially the Will Anderson 2021 tape. Tyree Wilson on his best day is not Will Anderson on his worst day in 2021. And they moved him around. His role was a little bit different in 2022. And don't get me wrong, Tyree Wilson is a fine prospect. I think he's a top 10 guy in this class, but he's not in the same stratosphere as Will Anderson.
Yeah, there's got to be a reason. I'm not sure what it is, unless they're just trying to confuse Arizona. I don't know, because it is a new regime. Okay, so in our mock, next up is Las Vegas, and so this is where we come into play with a few different options. Let's see, where am I at in my Las Vegas information? Let me move all the way. Oh, this is as good a time as any. Look what I got here. The Orlads draft guide is out. Yes. So this is what it looks like. Matter of fact, you can see a picture of this. Adam Schefter actually tweeted this out. He tweeted out a picture of this and another guide, I guess he uses. But this is the one that you want to purchase at ourlads.com. We have a link in the description area for you to check it out. So it is out and ready for your enjoyment. Okay, so Las Vegas, when I look at the different possibilities here, at some point they're going to need a tight end, but this is going to be way too early for that. But there's no question the Raiders will add a tight end in this tight end heavy draft, or at least you would think they would. Also, they definitely need a right guard, but again, this is just too early. I don't think Torrance is going to go this early. So I really think then what they have to start doing is looking at defense, and more defense, because what they really need, they need edge rushing help. And I say that because of the fact that if you look at it, Chandler Jones is getting up there in age, and there's not a whole lot behind Chandler Jones and Max Crosby. Also, they need a number one safety, but they're not going to use that this high in the draft. And they need a number one corner. So the way I look at it very similar to the way I'm analyzing Detroit. Edge rusher, corner. And you went ahead and took my corner, because I had Christian Gonzalez going to Vegas in my mock.
Okay.
So that would lead me to think, all right, if that were to happen, do I believe, and Wilson's also off the board, of course, if that were to happen, do they go with the next best edge rusher or the next best corner, unless there's another position? But I'm going to stick to the fact that I just think that the corner, even though our lads, by the way, I believe our lads, this is not your analysis or your rankings, but our lads has Miles Murphy really high. And if our lads was doing a mock draft, they would be picking Miles Murphy here. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going to do that, because Miles Murphy is one of those players that we were talking about at the beginning of the show. Miles Murphy could go in the top 10. He could go 25, 28. He's one of those guys that I have no idea where he's going. So I'm just going to go ahead and play it safe, and I'm going to go ahead and take the next best corner and take Witherspoon.
Witherspoon. All right. I like it. I think it fits in with Patrick Graham really well. What he likes to do on the outside, mix of man and zone, really physical, needs to support the run. You know he's going to do that at a high level right away. And like you said, I mean, that team's been starving for real cornerback talent for a long time. And this is just another asset that's being put. I'm glad you didn't give him a quarterback because I still think some people
really. Some people want a quarterback for the Raiders.
Some people think that they are going to, whether they should or not. And I believe, McDaniel, he's now into the tenure already with some football in the rearview mirror. I think the plan for them has always been Jimmy G, and they're going to move forward without him.
Yeah, why would you? Yeah, exactly. If
with him.
Why? I mean, unless it was just, we want Jimmy G here as a stopgap, and that's all he's here for. Yep. But I mean, that's the only thing. We don't really know that. But why wouldn't he think of if there's any coach out there that would think of Jimmy G as still a viable 5-year option? Mm-hmm. It would be Josh McDaniels.
Yep.
So, but we'll see. Because this is, you never know. I mean, Anthony Richardson, he's a wild card. You can sit him for a couple of years. You can take your time with him. I can see why people are going in that direction. But I don't think Josh McDaniels wants to use up the top 10 draft pick to stash a quarterback when he can use a big-time player there to put into his defense so he can win now, which is very important for him.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up, we have Atlanta.
So, kind of throw the first curveball at the draft here. Something that many don't believe will happen because of the positional value.
And you had a trade, by the way. I just want to remind everybody. In your mock, you did have a trade with Tennessee.
I did.
So
I had Tennessee coming up and getting the first offensive lineman in my book. I believe that has to be priority number one for this team. Is that offensive line is just scary on paper.
It is, yeah.
And what I like about Skoronski in relation to Tennessee is you can figure out what spot to put him in when he gets in town. You don't need to draft him as a tackle. You don't have to draft him as a guard. You can, because I think there's some unknown there. And I think there's a lot of credibility behind the argument that he should not play tackle in the NFL because of the lack of length. But you figure that out once you get him in there. And even if you do put him at guard, you have a Zach Martin there. Great way to at least start the rebuild of that offensive line. But in a draft without any trades, I'm going to stick with giving Bijan Robinson to the Atlanta Falcons. Another top 10 running back in an era where a lot of people are just anti-running back top 10. We're talking about a special player here. And I have two reasons behind why I think this is both possible and likely based on the general manager and head coach. So stick with me here. The general manager for the Falcons, Terry Fontenot, he was with the Saints. And he was with the Saints when he was on staff in New Orleans. The team had 3 straight 7-win seasons, 2014 to 2016. The 2017 draft brought the arrival of Alvin Kamara. Okay, that's when they drafted him. Not a first-round pick, but they already had Mark Ingram there. The next 4 years after they had that dual-back system put in place because of the draft, they went on to win 11, 13, 13, and 12 wins. Now, there's a lot to that team that centers around Drew Brees and Sean Payton, I know. But if you remember, that's when Drew Brees started getting to the back nine of his career. And his production didn't really waver. In some ways, he almost looked at the best version of himself back then. And it wasn't talent. It wasn't the TB12 nutrition program. It was the supporting cast around him. And that front office where Terry Fontenot was a part of, he saw what that two-back system did to that team. And Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, who was really good last year from BYU, the rookie day 3 pick, you put them on a team that Arthur Smith loves to run the football. We saw that last year, number 1 in the league in attempts. And also his tenure in Tennessee had a lot of success was because of Derrick Henry. So I think that there's a shift league-wide getting away from these running backs at the top of the first round. But I still think there are some teams that can find a way to win football games with a lot of talent, a lot of resources put in the backfield. So I'm going to stick with what I think is going to happen at Atlanta. They've beefed up their defensive line in free agency. Calais Campbell, Onyemata. They have Grady Jarrett. They brought in Bud Dupree. They drafted 2 edge guys last year that they do like a lot.
Yeah, the edge after Dupree move, I think, is now, I think, the final nail that they won't need to use a high pick on an edge rusher.
So, you look at receiver, you have Drake London, you have Kyle Pitts, you're hoping Desmond Ritter works out. And the best way to take some pressure off him is exactly what they did. You get a solid defense up front. You think they're going to turn it around with this personnel. You have a lot of talent to throw the ball to. You have a solid offensive line. Let's make the backfield something that every opposing defense needs to put a lot of attention on week in, week out.
Well, in our first mock draft, which was a couple of months ago, Bijan Robinson to Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
So
I like it.
We are we're sticking with that. I like it. And the funny thing is that I made that pick with Atlanta and Robinson in the first mock, and I'm not doing it in this one. So, but the only reason I'm not doing it is just because of the fact that I just, as much as I really think it's going to go that way, like you said, there's just some part of me that's like, I wonder if they're going to look at this and go, like we know about the running back situation, and go, well, we've already got a running back, and do we need to have two of them, even though this guy's better or should be better, when we have other important needs to fill? Which is why on my mock I went with Witherspoon. By the way, if you did not go with running back, what would have been the position you would have went with?
With both corners off the board, I think taking the number 3 corner here would be a little bit of a reach.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean,
but you would have went with the second corner if he was available.
If he was available, yeah. I think that would be right there. If Witherspoon or Gonzalez was there for the Atlanta, I think that's who they would go after. But in this scenario, if they're just saying, hey, no running back, both these corners are off the board, I mean, do you have room for another defensive lineman? Sure, because a lot of these guys aren't going to be here next year or 2 years from now that they brought in. So you could make the argument for a Tyree Wilson, Miles Murphy in this spot to kind of give them like that highlight defensive lineman for the long term. But it's a tough spot. I even think there's an outside shot because of the history of Arthur Smith in the offensive line and how he knows how important that is, that this could be where Skoronski comes off the board. I do think that's a possibility. And you put him in that guard.
All right. The Chicago Bears are next, and they've moved down. And the big get this year for moving down, of course, was a wide receiver with DJ Moore. And let's see. In your mock, you went with edge rusher. In my mock, I went with an offensive lineman. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm not going to screw around. Skoronski is still on the board, and that's the direction. And by the way, I'm sure that had a lot to do with the fact that you had a trade in your mock. Because there's no way Tennessee is going to be able to get Skoronski unless they move up to try and get him. And this is really the perfect player, though, for Chicago, because Jenkins, they're not sure of yet. He's got the neck injury. That could be an issue. And so what happens is now they've got the insurance policy. If something happens to Jenkins, we'll put Skoronski at right tackle. If Jenkins is fine, we can move Skoronski inside the guard.
Yep.
So
no, it's another kind of like Tennessee. Like if Tennessee gets them, you just draft them, you figure it out from there. I mean, I actually feel better about Skoronski than I do Tevin Jenkins in terms of having that inside-out versatility. Right now, we still don't know about Jenkins on the outside. Skoronski, even though he hasn't played a snap in the NFL, would give me more confidence as a right tackle if that's where they wanted to put him than Jenkins. So you have that backup safety net, which is really important in terms of what this team is trying to do to protect Justin Fields, is just get the best offensive lineman in on that team as possible.
Yes.
And then move them around as chess pieces as the season gets closer.
Yeah, because that's the thing, is that even if you say, yeah, but what happens if everybody is healthy? Well, I mean, that's a good thing. Then you're going to have a sixth. And by the way, you could play 6 linemen. You can rotate the guys. So it's not, look, Whitehair is a serviceable player, fine. And at the, what do they have at the other guard position?
Well, Whitehair is
Whitehair and Nate Davis. They added Nate Davis.
Yeah, Nate Davis from Tennessee.
And again, Nate Davis is a fine player. So they got 2 fine guards. They're passable guards. I've seen worse, but you could still add a player that is probably day one when he steps up on training camp going to be their best lineman.
Yep.
So, all right. Next up is
Philadelphia. If they stay
Philadelphia.
put, Howie Roseman has traded up, I think, in the last 3 of the last 4 first rounds, and he's made 40 trades, I think, since he's
Yeah.
been taken over. So I think the guarantee that you can get from him is that he is going to be active, whether it's being moving up, down, getting picks in the future. But right now we're staying put at 10, and because of the fact that they have lost some defensive line talent, Javon Hargrave goes to San Francisco. They lost the starting right guard to Pittsburgh. Yes, they have some pieces in place, but Philadelphia has been built on the idea and the concept that you need to be too deep, basically, on the defensive line. Like, if you don't have 8, you don't have enough. And do I think they can make that aggressive move, like I said earlier, for someone like Jalen Carter? I just think it makes sense.
Yep.
But in a draft where we see them staying put, I don't see a defensive tackle that fits what they like to do. Kalijah Kancey is there. We know he's a pass rusher, but I think they want a little bit more power inside. They don't want just a pass rush specialist. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see draft weekend. And I feel the same way about Adebawore from Northwestern. So I'm kind of crossing off defensive tackle here. I just don't see the fit. Then I look at the edge defenders, right? You have Myles Murphy, Tyree Wilson, and Nolan Smith. Nolan Smith is a Hassan Reddick kind of clone, but Reddick's going to be here long term. Do you have spots on your defense for both those guys? And if you're using a pick at the end of the first round on a Nolan Smith type player, I can get behind that. But using the 10th overall pick on a guy that's going to rotate in with your best player on your defense right now doesn't make sense to me. So I think this comes down to 2 guys, Myles Murphy and Tyree Wilson. And
at this point, Wilson is dropping. Which
yes,
I don't think he's, from what everybody's saying, it would be a surprise if he was still available at 10.
Right. And again, guys, like, we see this every year, right? We see guys drop every year. This is the way it's going to be. I think we all have to accept that as fact. So we're looking at these 2 guys, and who offers a little bit more versatility, inside out versatility? It's Tyree Wilson. They both can do it. But Wilson's body type and his power, I think, could fit inside in certain looks, where Murphy is someone that's going to scream off the edge. Who's more refined right now? Probably Tyree Wilson. Murphy, I think one of his biggest weaknesses on his scouting report is that he's just not ready to rush the passer on a consistent basis. There's a lot he needs to learn. And because this team is so win now, they're in their window. They just paid Jalen Hurts a monster contract. It's not really going to hurt the salary cap for another few years. But your window is open. And because of that, I think they're going to be a little bit short-term greedy and go after the player that can help them out right away. And it's Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech.
And look, if Wilson does become this really impact player, then Philadelphia is going to feel awfully good about the fact that they'd be getting him at number 10.
Absolutely. Yep.
And in my mock, because I did not go with Robinson, this is where I went with Robinson.
Okay.
So what would you feel if that was the case? If Atlanta did not go with Robinson, and Philadelphia had the opportunity to go either edge rusher or Robinson?
It seems to me Philly is one of those teams that just has a rule for itself. They're not taking running back this high,
Yeah.
But trends are meant to be broken. That's something I learned a long time ago. That you can't just keep doing. You can't put yourself on repeat, because that's not the way the world works. So this team is set up for Bijan, right? Yeah. If maybe they're anti-running back in the first round because
they might be. Yeah. They might say, which is just like 7 of those guys we'll pick up in the 3rd round, 2nd round. We can pick up any of those guys.
And maybe the reason behind that concept is because in the past, Philadelphia did not have a good enough team to pick a running back in the first round. Maybe their thought might be more long-term. We have to get the nucleus of this team in the right direction. And then, if we can, we'll go running back if the rest of the team is all set. The rest of this team is pretty much set, right? Maybe a couple holes on the lines, but Bijan, to me, it wouldn't be the surprise to me that others think that if Philly did go with him at 10.
Say that again?
It would not be the surprise to me if Philly went Bijan at number 10.
Okay. Next, Tennessee. And this really is a very easy pick. So, look, I don't think there's any way this is going to be the way it plays out, because it would just be too easy for Tennessee. I think that, because that's the other thing, is that if Tennessee does move up, like you said, I think the first thing people are going to be thinking about if they trade up is quarterback.
Right.
That's usually what people think. But yet they desperately need the offensive line. So I think that, if they're in this position, even though they need offensive linemen, once you get past Skoronski, especially at tackle, you can kind of wait until late in the first round, early second round, and I think you can pick up a decent enough player. But this is just a no-brainer. Anthony Richardson being the pick for Tennessee.
So we've never seen 4 quarterbacks go in the top 10 picks, but here we go. We're getting our 4th one in the top 11. So we keep that streak alive.
Yeah.
This it's going to be interesting. Would Tennessee have a high enough grade on Richardson to pick him here? Do they really want to build the future around him? That's the question we don't know the answer to, but it is feasible. And Tannehill's probably not going to be there next year. And that you're probably not going to be relying on Malik Willis. So it seems to me that they've already started the rebuild process there, right? With some of the moves that they have and have not made, that this would probably be the year to bring in the quarterback that you don't want to see the field this season. I think that's a rule. Whoever drafts Richardson has to keep him off the field unless you're talking about very specific situations and looks.
Yep.
Let Tannehill play out. Let him ride off into the sunset. And then next year, you have another full offseason next year to build the nucleus around Richardson and the rest of this draft. So, and I think Mike Vrabel has built up enough immunity from being fired if they bottom out this year. If they have a really bad season, I think his job security is very secure. So if he was in a win now mode, he might not want to use this resource on a quarterback that's not going to play until next year. But he's a guy, one of the few coaches that if they go 0-17, he's still going to have a job.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, everybody knows next year they're going to look for a quarterback.
Yeah.
So why not get a head start on that and take care of it this year? But again, it all depends on if they like the kid or not. So,
right.
All right. You've got Houston next, and they've already got their quarterback. And in your mock, you traded this pick. So you had Caserio going with New England in a trade. And in my mock, I went ahead and went wide receiver with Quentin Johnson and not Smith-Njigba. Because there are a lot of people who are believing now there's going to be this Ohio State connection between C.J. Stroud and Smith-Njigba. I honestly, though, the more I'm thinking about it, and it kind of worked out that way in my mock, and a little similar in yours, is that I just think he's not going to go as high as I originally. I think there was such this, wow, what a workout. Wow, instant, like, this guy's going to be awesome. To like, all right, now be real, calm down. He's not all that fast. He's coming off an injury. So let's just, we know he could be a dynamic slot receiver. There's no question about that. But I think when you have the opportunity, if you're picking a receiver like Houston, I think you go after the guy that and we've talked about it, that would have the highest upside. Right. And that would be Quentin Johnson. But that's if they go wide receiver. So what do you think Houston is going to be deciding on at this point besides wide receiver?
I believe this regime is going to stick with what they have at wide receiver, at least through this pick. I think they'll add one at some point. But they brought in Robert Woods to a contract, by the way, that's not going anywhere. He's going to be there for a couple of years. They drafted Nico Collins. They drafted John Mechie. All right, let's not forget Mechie's coming back.
Well, you hope so, but yes.
Hope so, absolutely. Yeah. Right now, I'm assuming he's in their plans. So I believe that they're going to go with defensive coach bias here. DeMeco Ryans comes in. They use that top resource. They overlook whatever pass rusher they want, right? DeMeco Ryans had the opportunity to take any quarterback they wanted. Any defender that they wanted.
Yep.
And they went with the quarterback, probably a smart move. So now they're back on the clock, and he's going to pound the table and say, I got to get a guy to build around on my defensive line or on the edge.
So would that be Murphy?
You have 3 options
based on our board.
Based on our board, I would go Murphy. Do I think that's the fit for DeMeco Ryans and Matt Burke? Matt Burke comes from Arizona. Who did Matt Burke just coach? J.J. Watt. What's the kind of profile that DeMeco Ryans has been around while he was in San Francisco? Big, physical, fast, inside-out defenders. That one guy in this class that fits that to a T is Lucas Van Ness from Iowa. That's who I gave to Houston after a slight trade down in my mock draft. And I like his upside. I think he's raw. I think it's a major risk. Maybe Miles Murphy is safer, but he's not as versatile as Van Ness. Van Ness lined up inside, either head up on the tackle or inside more often than he did on the outside. And you see this with Eric Armstead from San Francisco. He's a DN, but he plays inside a lot.
Sure.
I think that's what they're going to go with here at this pick. I'm going to give them Lucas Van Ness, DN from Iowa.
And staying with that philosophy, would they also be able to look at a guy like Cansey?
I mean, Cansey's biggest red flag is size. I mean, he is.
Yeah, that's
small,
the thing.
small.
We don't know which GM is going to be okay with that. And going to be, hey, I like everything else that he brings to the table. And we just talked about this with Murphy. Cansey's another one of those guys. He could be in the top 10. He could be in the high 20s. You know, barely making it to the end of the first round. So it just depends on which general manager is okay with, hey, you know what? I don't care about the size factor. I think this guy's going to be awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And at some point, when you're talking about a pass rusher, you kind of have to overlook. If you're really confident guy is going to disrupt the passing game, you know he's going to rush the passer. It might not look pretty. He might not be a good run defender. That's a move you make. You ignore some of the other things. Some GMs might not see it, though. I don't see Aaron Donald and Cansey. I just don't. I don't see him going in that direction. I see more of, if you remember a D tackle from Iowa, while we're on those guys, I think he was drafted by Cincinnati back in the day, Mike Daniels. That's who, and his career ended up not being what many thought it could be coming out of college. That's what Cansey kind of reminds me of, that it's like a one and done shot. If he doesn't penetrate right away, I'm not confident he's going to be able to get to the passer. To me, I think he goes first round. I think it's possible he goes top 10, but there's going to be a camp of GMs and coaches that don't want that early.
All right. Next, my New York Jets. Oh, by the way, before we move out of Houston, what's also, I wonder at what point, because I think it'll be in this draft, which linebacker do you think is going to fit best for D'Amico? Which one is he going to look at and go, that's going to be that's my guy. That's and of course, it's not going to be with this pick because it's too early.
Right.
But maybe they trade down or use up one of their other early picks in the second or the third. But which linebacker, if he had his druthers and could pick any of them, which one do you think fits best at what he's trying to accomplish?
Now, are you talking about one of the top guys? Like
just pick whoever you can pick at linebacker. Which one do you think he'd want the most?
Skill set wise, I think it's Deion Henley from Washington State. He loves speed, ability to stay on the field in cover situations, and just physical nature. You know, Trenton Simpson's not good enough in coverage. I don't think he plays very smart either. Campbell, a little too heavy-footed. Sanders isn't an off-ball linebacker yet. He can be. Pace a little too small. I think Henley's the standout attribute guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he could get him in the second round. So.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So, again, the Jets are up now. And taking a look at and I've talked about their specific needs before. Offensive line is definitely at the top in my mind. I've said it all along. And that tackle position is still not completely set because you have no idea what's going on with Becton. Even Mitchell's coming back from an injury. You bring back Dwayne Brown. But we saw what happened with all the injuries. They're going to have to add a center in this draft at some point. So maybe in the third round. I think second round probably a little bit too early for that. But I think this is pretty much. And they also, by the way, are going to need another interior defensive tackle at some point. So I think that could. By the way, I think that can go anywhere. I think that could go here. You know, so because they've got the same philosophy. They want to have like 9 to 10 rotating guys on the defensive line, and right now, you know, they're about 3 short. So I could see them adding another defensive tackle early, even as high as this. And we've talked about the need for a hybrid guy like a Brian Branch type or a J.L. Skinner. But I'm going to go ahead and play it a little bit more safe. And I just think, and as a Jet fan, I never thought I'd be feeling this way, but I do. I just feel like, you know what? Just fix that offensive line, man. I'm sick of seeing this offensive line have issues with injuries or whatever. It's time to make this a top offensive line. And so I'll take Paris Johnson Jr.
I like it.
Which is on my mock. Is it on yours? Or you traded down, right? Or
I traded down.
Not?
A slight trade down and end up giving them Paris Johnson.
Okay, so we both had Paris Johnson Jr. Okay.
It makes sense because you don't know what's going on in that offensive line room. You know, Becton's a wild card. Max Mitchell is a wild card at right tackle for different reasons, but he played well enough to be in the discussion.
Yes.
You might be set at tackle, but then you have, you know, and hey, good problems to have, right?
Yeah.
But Johnson has experience at both spots, guard and tackle. That's high level.
Yeah, that's it.
High level experience. So yeah, I like the pick, and you know, if you're going to bring in a body like Aaron Rodgers, you got to support. You got to keep him upright as he gets older. You know, even if it's a 1-year rental or 2-3 year deal with him being in New York, that's got to be a priority every year. That if there's a potential hole in that offensive line, you got to fill it before it gets created.
And you know what they could do if they draft Johnson? All right, we're going to have a competition as far as, is it Vera Tucker at guard or is it Vera Tucker at right tackle? Where do we want to put Vera Tucker?
Yeah.
And maybe Vera Tucker fits better at right tackle and then move Johnson inside the guard. So that gives them the flexibility that we're talking about.
Yep. I love that.
Next up, the New England Patriots. And the Patriots could draft a wide receiver here. And, you know, you would think that that's definitely going to be on their mind. Now, you had them trading up in your mock to take Devin Witherspoon. And by the way, maybe that had to do with the fact that Devin Witherspoon was still on your mock at 12.
Right, exactly.
And we know New England needs corners, no question about it. Since I had no trades in my mock, I went wide receiver, and I went with Zay Flowers. So, and of course, this could be Smith and Jigba as well, if they go wide receiver. But in our mock, what you going to do?
Tough call here. I hate the right tackle situation for them right now. Riley Reif, Connor McDermott, Yanni Kajust. You know, that's a gaping hole to me. I could have seen them having interest in Paris Johnson and just using their second straight first rounder on the offensive line. But because he's not there, I think this comes down to a receiver or a defensive back. And I look at what the Patriots have in the defensive backfield. Brian Branch is just, to me, he is a Bill Belichick defensive back, someone that can play all over. But I kind of think it gives them multiple guys that play the same kind of versatile
like
nickel safety role. Yeah, Duggar, even like nickel. I mean, Miles Briner's their nickel. Adrian Phillips is kind of like an older version of Brian Branch. You know, and if there's a defensive mind out there that can make it work, it's him. But I think one thing they really do lack, and it's why I had them traded for Witherspoon, is they don't have a number one corner or even a guy that has a shot at being a number one corner down the road. Number one corners are hard to find, right? But there's a guy on here that's kind of standing out to me that I believe Belichick's going to like, the NFL lineage that he brings to the table, the length, unicorn length, height, weight, speed. He tried this with Joejuan Williams, the corner out of Vanderbilt, a couple years ago. He has not worked out at all. But I think Belichick wants that. He wants size on the outside. So I'm going to give them Joey Porter Jr., cornerback from Penn State.
All right, there you go. Porter is off the board. And, you know, look, the reason I went with wide receiver, and this is something we've talked about as well, and Patriot fans know this, is they have had all sorts of awful luck in drafting wide receivers early. And I could see that being, oh, no, we're going to pass a wide receiver. We'll take one in the second or third round. But their offense just held them back so much last year that the opportunity to take a really impact offensive player, I just think they have to do it. I just think they've got to improve that offense. They just must improve it. And that's why I went with wide receiver. But again, we know they need that corner. And if they think Porter can be a number one type guy, then that makes a lot of sense as well. All right. The Packers. Now the Packers, they actually have some pretty obvious needs. They definitely need a number one tight end. And the first tight end off the board could be here. They also later in the draft, by the way, they need to add a nose tackle. But this is also a team that has some secondary issues, especially at corner. They could probably add a couple of corners. And matter of fact, taking a look, let's see, on your mock, you had Brian Branch. And on my mock, I went with Michael Mayer. And I was thinking about corner and Branch and DB and all that stuff. So this was a tough one because I kind of went, but based on our mock now with Porter and Gonzalez and Witherspoon off the board, I don't know if one of these other corners should be here at 15. They could be. Somebody could fall in love with Banks. Especially, I think Banks might be the wild card because of his speed and so forth and his experience. But you know what? I'll just I don't see anything else that has opened up in our mock. And since those top 3 corners are gone for me to even potentially consider anything different, I'll stick with what I did and take Michael Mayer.
Okay, I like it.
And what do you think about tight end? Do you think if they take tight end, Mayer will be considered?
Absolutely considered. I've gotten some flack with my outlook on Mayer. I have him as the number 4 tight end, but I have him as a borderline first rounder. And if you're looking for safe, I think he's by far the safest tight end in the class because he could do it all. The upside with him, to me, is not as high as Kincaid, Musgrave, Washington. But Green Bay, to me, they're a safe franchise. I don't think they really stick their neck out that much. And at the very least, Meyer's going to come in and be a long-time starter in the NFL. I compared him to Hayden Hurst, the tight end that keep moving around, but everyone kind of wants him, right? Hayden Hurst is a much better tight end than most in the league. I'd say he's one of the top 12 tight ends, and I think Meyer will be there for a long time. As long as you're not getting Travis Kelce, George Kittle out of Meyer, I'm fine with using a first-round pick on him. But I wouldn't go into this process. He's just not the athlete that those guys are. He's not the blocker that Kittle is. And he's not as big as people think. I don't know if everyone really realizes he looks bigger than he is on tape. When you really look at the measurements, he's a pretty average to below average size tight end for someone that's going to play in the line a lot. Now, will Green Bay split him out like that Notre Dame did a lot and kind of manufacture some production for him? Absolutely. I think that's the best route for him to go. So maybe Green Bay might not be done because they lost Tanya and they lost Mercedes Lewis and I don't believe in Dogara. Meyer could probably be their feature slot receiver that occasionally puts his hand on the ground. And they could even go back to this deep tight end class at some point and find a guy that's a little bit more comfortable playing in line.
Yeah, it does seem to be, though, you would think it's going to come down to defensive back or tight end for Green Bay. So we'll see what direction they go. All right. Next up is Washington. So you've got this Washington Commanders team that look, nobody knows what's going on at quarterback, and we also don't know what's going on because of the ownership. And is it win now? Am I worried about the future? So that has to come into play. This is another team that needs a tight end, so we have to keep that in mind. And you know what? They've got other needs. They've got to go after a corner, and they should definitely add another middle linebacker. And I think that even though they have 2 really good edge rushers, this is a situation where we could see a trade. They've got to pay big money for Chase Young and Sweat, and I don't know if that's going to happen. And if they think forward, they might just say, all right, maybe we'll trade one of these guys. And even if they don't obviously tip that yet, you would think that another edge rusher is also going to be important, because if they do trade one of these guys, or let's say they just can't, figure out a way to keep them, maybe they tag them for a year, whatever, that's going to mean they're going to need another edge rusher at some point anyway. So they've got a lot of options when you can go here.
Yeah, this is actually a pretty tough team. In my mock, I actually had Washington trading up for Anthony Richardson to try to reunite that Ron Rivera, Cam Newton type relationship that they had in Carolina. Maybe that's a little bit too much of matchmaking in heaven, but hey, I got to do what I want because it was my mock.
That's right.
because none of these guys are available, I can't get behind Sam Howell being the guy. I just can't. I don't believe that they're just going to give him the keys to the bus and say, you're the guy. He might even have to beat up Jacoby Brissett in preseason. I
I would
really
think
feel like
so.
his job
Yeah.
isn't that secure. So if there was a quarterback here, or they were within striking distance of trading up for one, I believe it's the move to make. The issue is with new ownership, does Ron Rivera feel secure in his job? Right. And maybe it's at the point where you just can't think about that. You have to try and just go win games this year. With Eric Bieniemy coming from Kansas City and knowing what he had offensively, that we all know Andy Reid was calling the shots out there, but Bieniemy was a part of it, and that's what he's been exposed to. Recency bias, right? Kelsey's on a trajectory of being the best tight end of all time. Is there a tight end here worth taking?
Absolutely.
And I do. I think there's two of them worth taking that fit the mold of what Bieniemy likes to do with the tight end, and it actually complements what they have at receiver really well. I mean, if Curtis Samuel stays on the field, the trio of McLaurin, Dotson, and Samuel is a pretty solid combination, a pretty solid trio with a true number one out there.
And then if you throw in a really good tight end.
So which one fits the best? Is there a Kelsey profile between Kincaid, Washington, and Musgrave? I think the profile goes in the direction of Musgrave. This might be a little rich for a guy that barely played in college. If you look at how many snaps he actually played, he didn't play much. He missed almost all this year. The Pac-12 didn't play a lot of football during the COVID year. And he shared a lot of snaps with Tegan Quintoriano, who was a pick of the Houston Texans last year at tight end for Oregon State. So it's a guy that, but tools-wise and NFL lineage, he's the guy. I think he's the Kelsey fit. But I'm going to stick with my gut and give them my tight end one and give them Dalton Kincaid after all that talk about Musgrave. Because I believe what I've been saying about Kincaid since day one.
Yeah.
I've been saying this since the fall.
Oh, yeah.
He's the best passing game weapon at tight end in this draft. And I believe Bieniemy doesn't care at all how good or how bad of a blocker he is. What can he do to help our passing game? And I believe he's the guy.
Yeah. I mean, all you had to do is when you watched Utah in those big games last year, it was just amazing watching him play. And you just get he is the closest thing to and I know he doesn't necessarily look like it physically, but it's sort of like a Gronk type, guy that you just get the feeling that, man, he is just going to be a quarterback's best friend. And that quarterback's going to love him. And, Detroit's not happy if that's the case, because you would think Detroit, that would be a perfect spot for Kincaid at Detroit. And now we've got two tight ends in a row off the board. So now comes Pittsburgh. And, see, this is all going to come down to how, because it's so easy for us to look, and we've done it. Look, they've got to do something about the tackle positions. I mean, they can't possibly think that they're in good shape at that position. But again, we don't know. We don't know what they think. They did a really good job adding guards, and because of that, they at some point, no question, need to add another tackle. And this could definitely be a point they do it. In your mock draft, you did. You went with Broderick Jones. Mm-hmm. And in my mock, I went with Brian Branch. And I felt Branch, because that's another position. Really, you look at that, they need cornerbacks. They need two corners. And they definitely need a nickel. And that could be a perfect position, and that's why I put Branch there. I think that would be they are also use an inside linebacker. We've talked about that. It's probably too high. I think they could wait for their next pick because they have that 30-second pick. They got the first pick of round 2. And if they want, they could add maybe a Jack Campbell there, who we've talked about, that kind of type. And we've talked about this, think of Joey Porter would be a great fit, but he's not on our board. So that comes down to one of the other corners, a Banks, a Ringo, a Forbes, or a Branch, a DB, or the offensive tackle. And so let me just make sure before I make the pick. that somebody wasn't off the board. Nope, everybody is there. So I'm going to go ahead and say that they're pig-headed about their tackle position right now. And I'm going to say that they just look at this Brian Branch kid as a perfect player for their defense. He's the guy that's a Pittsburgh Steeler. And if they can't get one of the top 3 corners, I'm going to go ahead and take Branch.
I like it. You can make an argument for him coming in and playing nickel right away.
Absolutely.
Or the safety spot next to Fitzpatrick. Do you really want to get that spot to Keanu Neal?
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
That's a spot that I think Keanu Neal could be a good player as an accessory, but not a starter, and so I think there's 2 spots Branch could come in and immediately give you starter snaps. And that's not common from a defensive back. So I like the pick. And, I don't believe Branch is on the same level as Minkah Fitzpatrick, but there are a lot of similarities, including the position that they played for Nick Saban and how that translated to the NFL. So I like the fit.
Okay, next up, the Detroit Lions. And our Lion viewer buddy friends, I think they have to be realistic about the fact that this is going to be a position where they could very well go tight end. Now, 2 of them are off the board. I think we agree Kincaid is probably the one that they would like the most, but he's not. He's not there on our mock. That does not mean that they won't go after Washington or Musgrave, but it does mean that, hey, if they really thought, hey, Kincaid is our guy, and then there's a drop, maybe they wait to go tight end. But if they do, what other positions should they be looking at?
Yeah, I don't see another tight end coming off this early. I mean, having 3 tight ends go in the top 18 before we have a single, we haven't had a wide receiver come off the board yet either, right? I mean, it's just doesn't seem like it's very likely. So I'm gonna go away from tight ends here, and I'm gonna go in the direction of where we actually started talking about Detroit in the top 10, and it's not quarterback. Don't worry. The defensive line,
yes.
The interior of the defensive line. You have 2 guys here that fit the ethos of Dan Campbell. Hustlers, disruptors, physical guys. You have Kalijah Kancey and Adebawore from Northwestern. Which one is the better fit? It might be Adebawore. Which one do I think is going to go first in the draft? Based on a couple of people that I've talked to, it's like everyone's underrating this guy. He's going to go early. It's Kancey. And if he does pan out to be a disruptor inside, this is a line that can afford this kind of move where, hey, we don't need him to be an every down player. We need a pass rusher. And if they have all these kind of guys hit as pass rushers, you're talking about something that is going to strike a lot of fear into opposing teams that are trying to pass the ball on them, especially with what they did to that secondary this offseason, including Christian Gonzalez at the top of the first round with their first pick. So I'm going to give them Kalijah Kancey here.
Yeah, that would be a really – I think Detroit fans would really like that. So I think they'd be all over it because, yeah, I mean, with Kincaid off the board, I don't think that fans would be very happy about the 3rd tight end in the draft with one of their picks here. So, yeah, that's a good one. Put him along with McNeil. And
and you got Hutchinson, you got Houston, you got Kaminsky, who I like last time we talked. I like Kaminsky. That's a nasty defensive line in combination with a nasty secondary, especially if Gonzalez pans out.
And again, look, they could also – this is why we've talked about it. I mean, Miles Murphy is still available, but, as far as edge rushers, that's another area that they could be looking at. And again, you mentioned the kid from Northwestern too, so – all right, so now we go to Tampa Bay, a team that does have some needs, and you wonder whether or not they're going to look at a quarterback here, meaning, of course, Hendon Hooker. I don't think that's going to be the case. Mayfield is going to get a shot. And I can't imagine, too, that they're bringing Baker Mayfield in to be like, all right, let's bring him in to be a 1-year rental. Why would you do that? Bring him in, see if he can be a quarterback, And so if you do that, why would you spend a first-round draft pick on the 5th quarterback of the draft? Maybe 2nd round, I could see them doing that. And look, they could do it. I'm not saying that they can't. It makes a lot of sense in a way, but interestingly enough, we both had the same pick here, and I can't really change that because of that, and that's the offensive line. And we know they have offensive line issues. I don't care that they added Filer. He's just like a sixth lineman. That's all he is. They need a right guard and they need a right tackle at the very least. And hopefully they have their left guard situation set. Hopefully. So they have to go offensive line more than anything, and that's why I'm going to stick with our boy Torrance from Florida.
I like it. Yeah, I mean, you look at, other than Tom Brady leaving, what is the biggest difference between this team and the one that won the Super Bowl? It's the offensive line. I mean, you had Donovan Smith, Tristan Wirfs, Marpet, Kappa, Jensen. Almost all those guys are gone, and you have one of them moving from right to left tackle, which I'm sure will work out fine for Wirfs at left tackle with Tampa Bay, but it's still just another question mark. You don't know. Maybe he is just one of those guys that can only play on the right side. So before you go back and try to rebuild the roster, whether it's with Mayfield or another quarterback, while you have the opportunity, and there are multiple offensive linemen that could fit this spot. You have Torrance, you have Broderick Jones, you have Darnell Wright if you want to tackle. To look past those guys, for what? I don't know, a slot receiver. I don't even know what you would do over an offensive lineman that would make any sort of sense here. I mean, do you love Nolan Smith and you feel, or Miles Murphy? I don't think they're enough to overlook just getting whatever offensive lineman you want. I mean, this is pretty late in the draft to see, is this only the third offensive lineman we have that come off the board? In a league that is starving for offensive line talent, you got to take advantage of what's put in front of you, and I think that's a good call.
All right. Next up, Seattle again. And Seattle with Jalen Carter. And if that holds, they've got themselves a stud.
Yep.
So what's next for Seattle?
This is a tough call for me. I want to stay with what I did in my mock draft and give them Jackson Smith-Njigba, who I believe is just a perfect fit for the situation, a perfect fit for what I think he could be in the NFL, which is a guy that just catches 100 balls in his sleep every single year. You let DK and Lockett make the big plays downfield. This guy is going to roast everybody underneath in that kind of offense. But Nolan Smith is looking at me, Jalen Carter's teammate from Georgia. And that edge group in Seattle, it's vulnerable because you have Darrell Taylor and Uchenna Nwosu both entering contract years. And Nolan Smith kind of fits the same idea as what Schneider and Carroll did with Bruce Irvin. A little undersized, but he's going to disrupt the passing game off the edge. And Seattle, I think, is still, as much as they committed to Geno Smith, this team is going to win because of an efficient offense, not a high-powered offense, and a dominant defense. They have a lot of pieces on defense, but they don't have the edge guy. And here he is looking them square in the face. Jackson Smith-Njigba. I'm going to believe that someone told me Nolan Smith is going higher than people think, and the wide receivers are going to take a dip. So I'm going to go with Nolan Smith here and go away from my gut. My gut says Smith-Njigba, but I'm going to stick with what I've been hearing, try to go for accuracy here, and give Nolan Smith to the Seattle Seahawks.
Okay. Yeah, if you look at it, at some point they're also going to have to add a right guard. Maybe in round 2. Round 3, you can look at like Daniels or McFadden, those types of guys, and definitely a corner you would think is going to be high on the list. So that would be a consideration. Matter of fact, I think let me see if I put a corner. Yeah, I had Banks here, so I went with Banks. Okay. Because they definitely need a corner. But, like you said, that slot position, Eskridge, only they know how much they think they can count on Eskridge. But
right.
You just feel. But the problem is they don't really have any depth after Metcalf, Lockett, and Eskridge anyway. So a receiver really early enough, if not here, then coming up is going to be something that they're going to have to add. So yeah, hey, if Smith is falling, if he's a guy that is just too good to pass up here, you might as well go ahead and grab him. Next up, the Chargers, and we're finally starting to hear some talk with the Chargers about adding another running back. So that's good, but you don't do that in the first round unless Robinson's available. You wait until later on because there's a whole bunch of other guys you can get. Maybe even get Miller, player like that in the second or third round. And I think that's the way you go. I think adding a receiver, and especially to the fact that we have, like you said, we haven't even drafted one yet. So they would be in great shape to add another impact receiver, which is what they need. I mean, you saw what happened last year with the injuries, and Allen is getting older. There's just no depth now. Carter's gone. I know there's talk about tight ends. I get it, but that's not the direction I'm going. I think Everett is serviceable enough. Not that they can't add another tight end because it's a deep class, but especially, and by the way, we know they definitely need a corner. You know, they need a nickel back. They might even be able to. So definitely one corner must be added to this team. And they could also use another, like a run defensive lineman, another guy that they could use up front. In your draft, you did go with Kincaid. And by the way, you passed on Kincaid going to Detroit. So you went with the Northwestern kid to Detroit.
That's right.
And in my mock, I went with corner. So I went with Ringo, who was my next top corner on the board. But you know what? Enough of this wide receiver stuff. There's just no way these receivers are still going to be on the board. So it's going to be. I tell you what, I'm not going to go with Quentin Johnson here though, because of the fact that I think that's kind of redundant with Mike Williams. I don't really see you should do that. So I think it's going to be Flowers or Smith and Jigba, and I'm going to go ahead and put Flowers in here. I'm taking Flowers.
All right, let's do it. Going for the more dynamic athlete.
Yeah, I think they.
The issue. What I like about that is he's a better complement to Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Smith Najigba is a very much Keenan Allen type threat. Underneath slot, a lot of catches, not a lot of big plays, some yards after the catch. The question that LSC might be asking is, how long is Keenan Allen going to be in our picture? You know, is this the last year? Do we have 2 years out of him? If they think Keenan's going to be gone relatively soon, that might make them lean towards Smith and Jigba. But if they think he's going to be there for 2-3 more years, Flowers is definitely the complement. And that team needs more spark. Every time you watch the Chargers, you walk away with the same thought out of their passing game. They need more spark, and that's what Flowers brings to the table.
Yeah. And again, the tight end position. Why did you go with Kincaid? Was it because he was too good to pass up at that point, or was it? Yeah, I really think the Chargers need a tight end.
I think they need a tight end. That if it's Kincaid, I don't think that Musgrave or Washington.
So
if
Kincaid was off the board, offense. You would not have taken a tight end.
Correct. Okay. Correct. At that spot, yeah. Kellen Moore is calling the shots there, and he's had a lot of success when he has two receivers and a pass catching tight end. Gerald Everett, I think he's serviceable, like you said, but he's not someone that is on Kincaid's level in terms of having impact on offense.
Oh yeah, and then at this point, hell, if you're going to go with the third tight end instead of the first wide receiver.
Right.
All right, Baltimore's next.
So Baltimore, they added Odell. I think that kind of rounds out the receiver group. I'm going to assume Lamar's going to come back. I hate the fact that we still don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, and it's like the Jets and Aaron Rodgers.
What Baltimore does really well is they let the board come to them. And last year they get Kyle Hamilton lower than where he should have been drafted. They get Tyler Linderbaum lower than where they should have drafted. So sticking with that theme, what player kind of sticks out on the board that is just too good of a value to pass up, even though that might not be the number one need of this team? And I'm going to stick with that thought as I go. I have two names. Well, I have three names. One of them is Broderick Jones, the tackle from Georgia. One of them's the receiver, Smith and Jigba, and then I have Miles Murphy. That name keeps on coming up, and we're going to see an edge talent or two drop in the draft. And it is very possible it is Murphy, because right now he's more about potential than current impact. So they have, let's not forget, they have Ojabo coming back this year. I still think they like Owe. I think they're going to, and they have Tyrus Bowser still. Adding Miles
that
Murphy
is going to be a tough, but they are going to think long and hard, though, about adding the slot guy. Oh, Murphy too, sure. If he drops and like we talked about, that's that because but that slot position could be a really good spot for Smith and Jigba, even Addison. I mean, that's something to. But look, that's kind of the way they've gone, though. I mean, because really, if you look at it, their wide receiver room right now still looks a lot better than it had in the last few years. So are they going to go all out and just add another really high impact? Maybe they will. Maybe they're just sick of it. But who knows? We have no idea because, like you said, not. But also, by the way, you and I both took corners in our mocks, and we definitely know
the corner I gave them is there. The corner I gave them is there, and they do need a corner. And Deonte Banks just seems like that 6'+", speedy, physical guy that Baltimore always likes to have on the outside.
Boy.
The one guy. That is another hometown boy. The one guy that they didn't fit that profile was Anthony Avery, and that's the one guy they drafted somewhat high recently that didn't make it to his second contract with the team. And so I believe that size, speed combination is there for them. But I think enough is enough with this Baltimore Lamar Jackson drama. Hey, you're not doing enough to put players around me. They sign Odell. They use his first-round pick on the best player on the board by a pretty wide margin, Jackson Smith-Njigba.
All right. Now we're getting the wide receivers.
Here comes the run.
About time. Okay. Yeah, but like you were saying, Murphy is definitely got to be, or an edge rusher period is going to be something they have to consider because we haven't yet. We don't now. Look, maybe they're ready now, and they think after a full year and a half, Ojabo is ready to break out, and Owe after a couple of years, he's ready to break out. But they better because they don't have much else after that. So that's why an edge rusher is definitely under consideration. Minnesota's next, and Minnesota probably not very happy that the run of receivers is starting to go because they could use receivers, but it's only been 2. So this is a team that could definitely add another receiver and still on our receiver board. We still have Quentin Johnson, which would be a nice fit. So would I think also Addison, I think would be a really good fit. I think either one of them could go here. We all know they desperately need to add corners. That's probably the most obvious need. And we take a look at the corners that are still available. So there's Banks, there's Ringo, there's Smith, there's Forbes. Let's take a look at our mocks. I had Forbes because I had 4 straight corners at that point off the board. I had Banks, Ringo, Smith, and then Forbes. So I was down to like my 6th or 7th corner. You went with a trade.
A trade down.
And here's I look, I have to say this. If the Los Angeles Rams trade up, meaning they've got to trade more draft picks. I mean, if I'm a Ram fan, I'm going to be, can you guys stop? Just stop. All right? Just stop. It's like the Social Security system. It's like, what do you want? What do you think is going to be? What do you think is going to be gone faster, Social Security or the Rams draft picks in the future? I mean, wow. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, you had Minnesota moving down and taking Hendon Hooker. So that could definitely be on the board, and I completely would agree with that because we know Minnesota, just like we said with Tennessee. Minnesota's got to get if they do it now, they get a year ahead of the case, and maybe they could go after a Richardson, or maybe they go after a Hooker and have a guy that's waiting in the wings when it's time to move on from Cousins, which could be next year. So anyway, I think this is easy unless they're thinking quarterback. I think it's between wide receiver and corner, and so it's between Quentin Johnson And at corner on our board, we still have all these guys. So I'm going to go ahead with corner since we still haven't even gotten past the top 3 yet. And I will go with Banks.
Okay.
Okay, so Banks is off the board. And you got Jacksonville.
Right. Jacksonville. So it's funny. I was going to take Banks with Jacksonville, so I'm going to have to kind of reevaluate right there. It happens, right? It happens.
I had Nolan Smith going to Jacksonville, and you had Michael Mayer going to Jacksonville.
Michael Mayer going there. Yep. Yeah, I love the 2 tight end idea. Yeah. I love the tight end idea for Jacksonville. I really do. Because, when Doug Peterson really turned things around in Philly, that was a big part of it, was they already had Zach Ertz, and then they used the first pick of the year the draft where they took Dallas Goedert. I think it was a second rounder, 43 overall. That's who they took with their first pick, was a tight end, so that they could have a 2 tight end offense. And eventually Wade could buy to Ertz. But those guys played together for a few years. And, with a quarterback that was entering his 3rd year, it kind of made things friendly for him. Trevor Lawrence is entering his 3rd year, and they're trying to make them offense friendly for him. They get Calvin Ridley. They franchise Evan Ingram. They have a great running back. Tight end to here, Darnell Washington, who's an ideal complement to Evan Ingram. It makes a lot of sense because he's the guy that could put his hand in the dirt. He might be a better run blocker than some of their linemen, Darnell.
I think this is another team that can use an edge rusher.
Yeah, and this is where I think I'm going to stop the nosedive of Myles Murphy. This is where I think he deserves to go. So I think it's going to come down to one of those 2 guys. If they're not confident in the offensive lineman, I do think Broderick Jones is an option. Are you that confident in Cam Robinson? Are you that confident in Walker Little? So that's an option as well. But Myles Murphy gives them the opportunity to do what they want with Trayvon Walker, which is put him all over the place. If you don't have someone to play outside linebacker where Trayvon is lined up right now, you're kind of keeping the most versatile piece on that defense in one spot. So Myles Murphy comes in, gives them that extra edge rusher, and if he pans out along with you already have Josh Allen, that's something special for those guys.
Yeah, I mean, you also, well, by the way, I had Nolan Smith, so I'm right there, edge rusher, and they definitely need to upgrade the left guard position, so we'll keep an eye on that. And they could also upgrade the nickel cornerback spot, so another corner at some point, which they could do a little bit later on. Don't have to be in the first round. All right, so that's Jacksonville. Next up, the New York Giants. And the Giants, we think at some point, maybe in the middle rounds, would be a nice spot to pick up another running back because we don't know about the future of Barkley, and they really don't have anything behind him anyway. So just like we were talking about with the quarterbacks, you think early in case Barkley is gone next year, and you pick your running back this year in the middle rounds and hope you get the right guy. This wide receiver, and we talked about Quentin Johnson being a really good fit here because of his size, and the Giants can use size. The thing is that they really have stockpiled their receiver room. And I don't know how they feel about that. We can obviously see they need size, but do they care? I don't know. Some teams don't. So, but Quentin Johnson is definitely there. I think Torrance, if he's still on the board, would be a nice pickup because they have to add some offensive linemen. And matter of fact, right now, I mean, Jones is still out there. But they've got they've got their mammoth right tackle anyway. They don't need another one, so they could probably wait on that. They could also use some more edge help. Maybe so one of the edge rush guys that are available, like McDonald on our board, could be somebody. And there's another guy that actually was on my mock that I'm going to hold off on a second here. And then the cornerbacks, I think there's a little bit too much uncertainty about what they're doing really at that corner. And really the entire defensive backfield is like, they got players, but I just wonder what their fits are. Like, what do they really believe in, this particular model of who's going where, who's playing nickel and who's so. But I think nickel is definitely a big issue here if they want to grab one of these corners that we still have. But I am going to go ahead and do what I did in my mock because he's still there. On your mock, you had Zay Flowers, so you did go the wide receiver route. By the way, was Quentin Johnson available in your mock at that point?
He was. I actually had him slipping out of the first round. So,
okay. So
you
he's
know,
one of the guys you have slipping.
he's definitely an option here. 25 for the Giants. Some of the receivers they brought in are, you can tell just by looking at the contracts. It's some of them. I mean, some of them don't even have a spot locked up for this year. Jameson Crowder. I mean, that deal can be cut without pretty much no cost. So, I think Johnson is one of the few teams that is kind of in play for the Giants in round one. But if they pass on him, you could see him slipping.
Yeah. There's two players then that it's going to come down to for me. And I'll tell you what, since he was taken off of my mock early when I put Quentin Johnson with Houston, I'll go ahead and take him here. Okay. The player I had on my mock that I was considering was Azeez Ojulari's brother. So,
okay, BJ. Yep.
Yeah, so I thought adding BJ, because they need some more edge help too. Thibodeau is a good start, but other than Thibodeau, they really, I mean, Azeez is not like a dynamic. I mean, he hasn't been that guy yet. Maybe he will, but I think if they add another guy, that could really help things out there. But again, because Quentin Johnson fell, I'm going to go ahead and put him here.
I like it.
Okay. The Dallas Cowboys.
Tough call here for a lot of reasons. Just some of the guys I thought they would be in play for are no longer available.
You're on your mock draft for the Cowboys. You had a trade, I believe.
Yep, I had a trade
with Kansas City.
And then I had them taking who I think I'm going to give them. I'm leaning towards Darnell Washington right now. A team that just lost Dalton Schultz to Houston in free agency. They have Ferguson. They have Hendershot.
By the way, I took Darnell Washington.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
On my mock.
So it makes it. He's a sixth lineman for that running game. That offensive line, I think they're fine, but there are question marks. And having another guy in the trenches that can move people off the ball and even pass protect in certain specific looks.
And by the way, I could also see them going wide receiver.
Yep, absolutely. Wide receiver is an option here.
If one of those guys, maybe Jerry Jones has flashbacks to what the hell was that other Tennessee receiver's name? The one that they had all that success with Michael Irvin back in the day. It was Michael Irvin, sure. And they had the wide receiver from Tennessee that was like that stretch guy.
I forget.
Like Hyatt.
Yeah.
So would he see Hyatt? Hey, I remember those teams we had. We had that deep. So anyway, keep an eye on that.
Yeah. Hyatt's an option here. I thought Johnson would have been an option for them if he was there, just because he's that vertical downfield threat.
Yep.
But I'm going to stick with my gut here and just go with what I think complements the team very well, both in the running game and passing game, and is a little bit of a risk. But if he pans out, we're talking about a guy that, you are going to have a really hard time finding a comparison for. He's kind of like a mix of like a Gronkowski, Mercedes Lewis type. And if he can stay healthy and keep his head on straight, Darnell Washington is just going to be the next Cowboys tight end that has a lot of success in the league. So I'm going to go Darnell Washington.
Yeah, and you can see too, this would be like one of those Jerry Jones, I'm smarter than everybody else picks.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick this really freak athlete type of guy. So he's off the board. That's 3 tight ends. Next up is Buffalo. You have them going in the middle with Brzee from Clemson. And let's see. I also went with Clemson, but he's off our board. He slipped a little bit. I took Miles Murphy here at 27 because I think it's like the Eagles. We talked about this, is that the Bills want, especially early in the draft, they want to add more defensive linemen, especially edge rushers. But right now, you could still look at maybe McDonald could be a guy to look at. right now. Brzee is still on the board. If they want to stay inside, that's definitely a possibility. So you got McDonald, you got Brzee. I think Wright actually might be an interesting pick for Buffalo because he could play both inside and out possibly. And they could use inside or out on the offensive line, but they don't usually pick offensive linemen early in the first round. That's just not the way they do things in Buffalo. So I'm not gonna go that direction. So yeah, so I'm gonna so looking at Buffalo. Oh, and by the way, also I think they would be very. I was very intrigued with the possibility of adding a wide receiver here. They put
like that.
Addison in the slot. That's a big upgrade over Shakir. That would be really something I could see them doing. So really, it's down to there's again, like you said, there's Brzee, there's McDonald, and then there's also Addison here. So let me just make sure. And yep. And on our board, I tell you what, I'm gonna go ahead. Oh, and there's also the need, if you take a look at their cornerback position, that is another important need. On our board, there's Forbes, Cam Smith, Ringo. So there's 3 corners that are up there. And you know what? I know Elam is gonna move into a starting role this year, so that's gonna help him out. I'll go ahead and maybe this is something that will surprise some people. Maybe, I don't know, but I'm gonna go ahead and take Addison.
Okay. I think that's a good fit. Stephon Diggs type player, and they can obviously coexist.
Yes.
But if you're not sure about some of the stuff that you hear, Diggs is an emotional guy. I think sometimes he says things he doesn't mean, especially after a loss. But if he's not in the long term vision of this team, and I'm saying 2, 3, 4 years from now, Addison is a very similar profile receiver to Diggs, and it's a nice hedge. But they can also coexist because they can both play inside outside. That's something that is really valuable in that offense. That Diggs can play slot, he can play outside, and Addison comes in with that same approach.
And by the way, and at some point they probably should think of adding another running back too. Even though Damian Harris is there, but he could just be a 1-year guy. But the way this offense runs, it's about the passing game. Pass, pass, pass. That's what we want to do. We neglect the run. We pass, pass, pass. All right, well, you got Dawson Knox. You like him, fine. But at receiver, the problem is that for me, I just Gabe Davis is sort of still to me like a one-trick pony kind of guy. I don't really think he's that dynamic. I think the reason that he's able to be so successful is because of Josh Allen. You put Gabe Davis on a lot of teams, and I think he's just a player. He may not even be anybody. So I think they really do need another weapon for an offense that's all about the pass. They need another weapon. They need another wide receiver. And maybe they wait to second round, third round. There's a lot of guys you can get there too. But they need another weapon in the passing game. All right, next up, the Cincinnati Bengals, another team that likes to throw the football, especially to their 3 wide receivers. They have 3 excellent receivers, maybe the 3 best on one team. Problem is they don't have anything after that. So this is another team that might be thinking about adding a receiver at some point. I know a lot of people are talking tight end, and I know this is going to be one of those debates that you're going to have is whether you think about long-term tight end. We decided to go the other direction and looked at what they've done over the last couple of years and said, you know what? They seem to be content with having a guy every year. Just a new guy that's their number 1 tight end receiver option. And who knows? Irv Smith's not old. Maybe Irv Smith, he was supposed to be the guy at Minnesota. Then he got hurt. So maybe with Burrow there, maybe he will become the guy. So I don't think it's as big as a need as maybe some other people. Not that I would be shocked if they took a tight end, but I just think there's other needs.
Yeah, and I think another thing that needs to be discussed, and this is more between the walls in Cincinnati, that the coaches in front office, what is the future of Joe Mixon here? legal issues,
Yes.
multiple legal issues over the years. Good football player, but I can make the argument that Pirine was more valuable for that team last year.
And he's gone too. Yeah.
And he's gone.
Yes.
So this running back room looks a little scary to me
Yeah.
if Mixon does get in trouble, if he does get hurt. And this is around the time of the draft where I could see the second running back coming off the board.
Absolutely.
I love Jahmyr Gibbs, and I believe he's a first-round caliber talent. I don't think people really fully appreciate how talented this kid is.
Oh, yeah.
As a runner, as a receiver. This kid goes to the SEC from Georgia Tech and just blows up. And again, you could do whatever you want with him. You could keep Mixon in town, and Gibbs still has a big role in this offense.
Absolutely.
The other question I have, though, is that right tackle spot is probably solidified for this season between Jonah Williams, who could force his way out in a trade.
But they got Collins backing him up.
La'el Collins there, that's probably one of the better backup tackles you're going to have in the NFL. But long term, you could make an argument neither one of those guys will be in the picture next year. And you have guys falling on the offensive line. And this is one thing that we don't see this happen in the league. You don't see offensive linemen drop like this that far because everyone wants them. And at some point, you're going to need them. And Broderick Jones is the guy that stands out to me because if there's one thing about him, I like him a lot. He's very inexperienced. He's still a little on the raw side. So while I love his long-term projection to be a quality starting offensive lineman in the NFL, it would be a solid move for someone to take him and say, we're going to stash him for a year or at least a half a year.
I can see
that. Let Jonah Williams play right tackle for the first half of the year. If he falls apart or if you get a trade market for him and you want to ship him out mid-year, you have this guy come in and not rush him into the action. So I'm going to stop the Broderick Jones fall and give him to Cincinnati here.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason, at least that I think we have him falling, is because in all honesty, there is a talent gap. I mean, these guys are not really – I'm sorry, but I could see – I think Jones going in the 20s makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
And even in the late 20s. And I could see the rest of those guys maybe – see, even a guy like Wright, I know a lot of people have him in the late first round. But it shouldn't be more than that. So, yeah, I think it's for a reason, and I could see it happening. Other potential options, the Bengals might be looking at some more edge rush help. They could also use some edge rush and interior rush help. So, maybe, hey, if a Cansey's available, that's something if he happens to fall.
Yep.
They could also use another corner. Definitely have that next guy as insurance. They don't have that next backup guy. But yeah, really like the Jones pick. And, maybe even a situation where if they pass on Broderick Jones, maybe later on in the second round, they could look at a DeJuan Jones.
Yeah.
Another type of offensive tackle. But anyway, and then, like you said, wide receiver. Look, we don't know what they're doing, too, with Ezekiel Elliott.
Right.
That's probably a one-year deal anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like the idea of adding Gibbs here. That could be something that they just can't pass on.
It'd be fun. It'd be fun for that offense to have him in that offense. It really would be.
All right. Saints are next. And let's see what we had with the Saints. You trade.
I had them trade out, and then
you had them trade out. Okay. And you had Carolina go in there and take McDonald. And I had Smith and Jibba going here. So I had him dropping, and this is where I had him go. And taking a look at that is because if you look, I know that the Saints fans really like this kid, Shaheed, and maybe he turns out to be a really good player. But you can use definitely. I mean, this team needs another receiver. You can't count on Thomas, and you just need another player. So I don't care if he's at slot or whatever. On our board, we're done all of a sudden. We went fast with the four receivers after we didn't pick them for a while.
Right.
So that they're all off the board now, except Hyatt's still there. So if they wanted to go that direction, they could do that. Also, the Saints, if you take a look, I think by the way, I think that's their main look on offense, besides potentially going offensive line, but I think it's too early because guard is probably the way that they're going to go. They don't have to worry about tackle, and I think you could look at the second round for a guard. I think they need some edge rush help. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't, you can't count on Turner. He hasn't done anything yet. Carl Granderson can't be a starter. They've just lost. They just had too many losses, and they need to add and replenish the position. And there are guys. You can go with McDonald, Ajulari, kid from Northwestern. You got Azuma. So there's a lot of potential edge guys. They could also use another linebacker. If who knows? Maybe one of the linebackers goes here. It could be a Simpson. It could be a Henley type. That could happen. And I also think they need to add a corner. And at corner, you've got Smith, Ringo, and Forbes still available. Based on that, just taking a look, I'm going to. Now, the thing is, they do have the kid Taylor that they drafted in the second round last year.
Yeah.
So they have to have high hopes that he's going to do something. So I'll move away from corner early enough. And by the way, they also need a defensive tackle. And we talked about that. And that's where I'm going to go because I can't see Saunders and Shepard as anything more than just rotation players. So He's still available. I'll take Brzee.
I like it. Yeah, I think they go with one of those two in this situation, one of the two D tackles, and it really comes down to what do they want more? Do they want the penetrating 3-tech? You take Adebawore from Northwestern. If you want a more every down player that can still play some 3-tech, by the way, you go with Brzee. And he's going to be a guy that I'm really, really, really interested to see where he goes because there's just a lot that went against him personally over the past 16 months. And if he does get back to where the trajectory he was on after his true freshman season, no longer dealing with the personal issues, no longer being put in the hospital with a kidney issue, no longer rehabbing an ACL, this guy I think there's a lot of like kind of swing, kind of like a home run or strikeout type player. And that I love the fit too, because I think New Orleans, the biggest need they have is an interior presence. So I like the fit.
All right.
So that kind of makes my pick with Philly on the easy side, right? So early on, we gave them defender Tyree Wilson, kind of inside out defensive lineman. A spot I think could pop up and bite them in the rear this year if an injury pops up to Darius Slay or James Bradbury is corner. And there's a corner I feel is a good fit for the scheme, but also a good fit for the situation in that he's not going to have to play right away. You could protect him a little bit. And it's Kelee Ringo from Georgia. Just schematically and personnel-wise, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they go after another Georgia guy.
Yep. Can't go wrong.
All right. So, adding to their defense. And they can start thinking about running backs later. By the way, there's no way that the Eagles are going to be picking 10th and 30th.
Oh, great. Yeah, there's no way.
It's not going to happen. So, at what point do they take their running back? They just added another receiver, by the way. And I wonder whether or not, by adding Zacchaeus, whether that says, okay, we don't have to go early now. If we were thinking that at receiver, maybe we could take one in the middle rounds. Because he's not a bad receiver, and his game is going to be upped, obviously, by having Jalen Hurst throw the football to him.
For sure. Absolutely.
So they might be in a position to not worry there. But, they're going to go running back at some point. The question is do they go after Robinson if he's available, or do they go with the next tier of guys? All right. The Chiefs are going to round it out, and the Chiefs, they can use an edge rusher. McDonald is still on the board. They could definitely go right tackle, and we talked about some of those guys are still there. You got Harrison, you have Bergeron, you got Wright. So they could go in those directions. They could also use another receiver, and Hyatt would be awfully nice. By the way, in my mock, I had Broderick Jones available, so I went that direction. You had a trade. and I think we talked about. Let me see if one of our previous mocks. I think let's see, one of our previous mocks. Let's see. No, we had Benton, and we had we had Will McDonald in the last mock draft, and he's still available. So I think it comes down to me, maybe McDonald, and maybe they even think about Hyatt, and we talked about how dangerous that would be if you put Hyatt with Patrick Mahomes. And all that kind of stuff. But I tell you what, I'll stick with McDonald. I think they need some more edge rush help, and I think last year they proved that they could win even with limited resources on offense because of Patrick Mahomes, and they could take a receiver a little bit later on if they need to. But
yeah,
I think if Hyatt's available or Addison's still there, it would not be shocking at all to see them add another receiver.
Yeah, and it's at some point you want to keep inserting talent into that offense. You can't just always rely on the scheme and Mahomes. So if they have a high enough grade on Hyatt, he makes sense. I think even Jahmyr Gibbs makes sense, even though they have Pacheco.
Yeah,
just from a receiver perspective in terms of what he can do for a passing game.
That's right. Younger version of what's his name? Who's gone? What's his name?
Yeah, gone. From what team? The Chiefs?
Yeah. The free agent now?
McKinnon?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So,
but I think he's going to be much better than McKinnon.
Wouldn't that be something? All right, buy
Same
McKinnon.
Profile.
We'll bring in Gibbs.
Yep.
That'd be awfully dangerous.
Now, Spagnuolo, right? Steve Spagnuolo has won now won 4 defensive coordinators, 4 Super Bowls as a D coordinator, or 3. And he's always had that extra pass rusher. He's always had, and that's, I think, in the playoffs, he does that as well as any D coordinator in the league. He knows how to really amp up the pressure. So I love the McDonald fit here. You give him that outside threat. You can move Omenahu inside on passing downs when you need to. You have Chris Jones. You have Karlaftis. Like, that's your NASCAR package, which he loves. He loves 4 DNs on the field at once on those third and short passing situations. So I like the fit.
That is going to wrap it up. Now, I want to remind everybody that we are going to be coming on for the draft review shows, and we're going to be doing a lot of content. That's going to be also very important, maybe even more important, because all this is just conjecture. It's fun. We're guessing, and we're giving you all the options. But I prefer it when it's all over and we know where the guys are going, and then we could really talk about who matches really well, what were the surprises, and I also like to pick out like the sleepers and things of that nature, because I don't want to pick those guys out before I know where they're going. So once we do that, we're going to be able to even come up with our like top sleeper list of players that are not drafted in the first round, guys that are even drafted in the 5th and the 6th and the 7th. So we're going to go over every team's draft. We're going to have all sorts of other cool videos, again, like sleeper lists and all sorts of other stuff. And we have our draft review guide coming out in June, correct?
Yep, in June, yep.
So what do we get started on that in May or June?
I usually get started myself like mid-May because, again, you want to listen and read all the press conferences from post-draft. And then we even like to get how a lot of these rookie camps and some of the OTAs, they occur before we send this out to kind of get a feel for where these guys lie in the depth chart.
Yep. All right. But we are going to be back right after the draft, just a few days after the draft. We'll figure out a day and time and all that kind of stuff, but we will be available right after the draft, and we'll start talking about your team and every team, because there's 5 teams that did not draft as of right now in the first round. What is it? The Rams, Denver, Miami, San Francisco, and Cleveland.
Yep.
I think those are the teams. Yeah. See?
Nice job.
I've been doing this long enough now. So anyway, we'll be back after the draft. Want to thank everybody for tuning in. And by the way, you're going to be posting anything, updating more than what you already have up on the website between now and the draft?
Probably not, to be honest with you. I'll probably just do a lot of post-draft stuff, maybe some analysis. But the agenda is pretty full right now, so I don't want to make any promises I can't keep.
Sounds good. Dave, appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Greg.